If we rightly understand the whole Bible, then we will know God's standards sufficiently to make proper determinations about any given ethical issue, as long as we also have a sufficient understanding of the persons and the situation. Now, understanding the sufficiency of Scripture for life raises a serious question. How can any book, even one as large as the Bible, cover every conceivable moral problem, equipping us for every good work? Well, in truth, the Bible does not address every conceivable moral issue directly. Scripture speaks directly only to a limited number of issues in life, such as the fundamental content of our faith and our basic responsibilities toward God and other people. But in so doing, Scripture lays down principles that we can extend and apply beyond the specifics mentioned in the Bible. This is why the Confession distinguishes between what is expressly set down in Scripture and what must be deduced from Scripture by way of good and necessary consequence. In all cases, however, Scripture provides us with the information we need in order to discover God's ethical standards. The last point we should note in the Confession's explanation of the sufficiency of Scripture is the qualification that Scripture is complete so that nothing at any time is to be added, whether by new revelations of the Spirit or traditions of men. Scripture contains all the norms we need as Christians. Human traditions and authority structures, such as civil and ecclesiastical governments, are to be obeyed for the Lord's sake, but they are never to be counted as absolute or ultimate norms. The decision to follow or not to follow human norms must be guided by scriptural norms, and human norms will always be defied when they conflict with biblical norms. We see this demonstrated in Scripture time and again. For instance, in Jesus' day, the established Jewish leadership allowed money changers and vendors in the temple area. But when Jesus saw this, he became angry and drove them from the temple because the human leadership had allowed violations of scriptural norms within the temple grounds. We read this account in Matthew chapter 21, verses 12 and 13. Jesus entered the temple area and drove out all who were buying and selling there. It is written, he said to them, "My house will be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of robbers." Jesus rightly understood that Isaiah chapter 56, verse 7, which he quoted, revealed the biblical norm that the temple was to be dedicated to prayer, but the Jewish leadership had permitted the temple grounds to be profaned by secular transactions. Jesus' condemnation that they were making the temple a den of robbers is actually incredibly strong. That phrase is drawn from Jeremiah chapter 7, verse 11, where it refers to idolaters and violent criminals who pay lip service to God at his temple. By his actions and words, Jesus demonstrated that following any human law or tradition is sinful when the human norm contradicts Scripture. In every case, Scripture is sufficient to establish all moral norms. The ethical ordinances of men, however, are valid and binding only insofar as they echo biblical norms. But when human norms contradict biblical norms, the Christian is obligated to defy them. With a proper understanding of the sufficiency of Scripture in mind, we should now turn our attention to some common misunderstandings of the Bible's sufficiency. We will group these misunderstandings into two fairly general categories. First, views that overestimate Scripture's sufficiency, and second, views that underestimate Scripture's sufficiency. Let's begin with views that overestimate Scripture's sufficiency. Typically, those who overestimate the sufficiency of Scripture have very strong commitments to the Bible. but they frequently lack proper commitments to general and existential revelation. As a result, they wrongly believe that they can properly apply Scripture to ethical questions without having much knowledge, if any, about specific situations and people. They believe that making ethical decisions is as simple as reading the Bible and obeying it. But in reality, before we can obey and apply the Bible, we must also know something about the people and situations to which we are applying it. God has provided us with this information in general and existential revelation. If we ignore these other forms of revelation, we are ignoring the tools He has given us for interpreting and understanding Scripture.